Forward, the session is being recorded. Thank you, Andrew. And everything in the chat box we're going to log. So welcome to Basic Cybersecurity Measures. Of course, my cat comes right now, for water utilities. Today's session is hosted by RCAP Solutions, which is part of a nationwide network called RCAP, which stands for Rural Community Assistance Partnership. And my name is Rebecca Novak. Hi guys, good morning. I'm going to be your host. I am in Massachusetts and work with the RCAP Solutions Network, so the purple states on the map there, not to forget Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands down there. We are a non-profit company providing training and technical assistance to rural communities and tribes with drinking water and wastewater treatment, utility financing, management, and general administration. Today's presenter is Andrew Hildick-Smith. Andrew is a civil engineer that worked at the Massachusetts Water Resource Authority for 30 years. He was responsible for the SCADA system for 17 of those years and championed its security. He has several cybersecurity certifications and has enjoyed participating in modest cybersecurity projects with WaterISAC, AWWA, EPA, and other organizations. He is currently the water sector chief for the Boston section of InfraGard, a principal at OTSEC LLC, and is working with MassDEP to improve cybersecurity at water utilities under the Small Systems Technical Assistance Training and Outreach for Public Water System program. That is a mouthful. So, and Andrew, now to you. If you are ready, I will hand the presentation over to you.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Oh, there we go. Excellent. Okay. So good morning, everybody. We've got a real nice mix of operators and superintendents and managers and directors attending the class today. And when it comes to cybersecurity interests, nearly everybody in the group falls into the self-described categories of being just interested or a general promoter of cybersecurity, which is great. And then we have a few people who are actually responsible for a cybersecurity program, and that's not easy, but it's doable. I'm planning to cover some basic information on water sector threats and incidents, and then spend most of the time on cybersecurity measures, and then move on briefly to incident response and resources and references. I'm hoping that you all become kind of quiet evangelists in your organizations for cybersecurity, because it really does take everybody to make a place cyber secure. So, you know, over time, maybe you recognize a particular cyber weakness at your utility, and then engage in some friendly nudging of the IT staff for them to make improvements, or maybe you can make those improvements yourself. You know, be an IT booster. You know, they don't have an easy job. So any support, you know, moral support, whatever encouragement you can give them is appreciated, because cybersecurity, it's incremental and it's a long haul endeavor. So I'm going to disappear from view for a while and continue with the presentation, but please ask questions as we go along. Okay, so starting off with acronyms, sorry about that, but just
Andrew, it might just be me, but I think we're still waiting to see your screen.
Oh.
Or at least I am. So, I think there's
so
just a
I
button.
apologize. Yes, you're absolutely right. So just
okay, thank you.
Backing up where I started, it's just the cover image. Sorry about that. And just sort of the agenda for today, those 4 broad topics. And now on to these acronyms. I apologize. So, but they're important to just have the shared vocabulary. So the IT is the information technology. So that's your business network, the computers you use to do your email, et cetera. The OT is the operational technology. So that's the SCADA. the industrial control system, ICS, the controllers, the PLCs. SCADA is the supervisory control and data acquisition system, so that enables the remote operations. The ICS is industrial control system, just another name, another word phrase for SCADA systems. And the HMI, the human machine interface, is what the operator interacts with, and it interacts with the PLC in the field, and the PLC is the programmable logic controller, and that's busy talking to the field equipment. And then this last one is CISA, the CISA, and CISA is an agency within the Department of Homeland Security. It stands for Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, and it's a really important group. It's an agency that everybody should get to know and know the people in it, because they have a lot of resources. They're the federal lead in cybersecurity, particularly with infrastructure security, critical infrastructure security, like what we have. So those are the terms that are going to pop up. Last month, in the middle of last month, there was a joint cybersecurity advisory from the FBI, CISA, the EPA, and NSA, National Security Agency, and it was really good summary of the landscape, the cybersecurity landscape that the water and wastewater sectors face. And on this front page of it, it's only 7 pages long, so it's a really good read. Do a Google search for it. It's listed in the references at the end, but it's a nice orientation. And what it has on the first page, in the box on the right-hand side, are 5 categories of things that every water utility, wastewater utility should do, like pronto. And so that's going to be the focus of the first 5 topics that we're going to be going through. First, let's talk just about the threats that we face. So they include, both the cyber adversaries and their methods. So the main adversaries that we face are, for the most part, it's criminals looking for money. And then potentially nation states looking to do harm. And that's going to be, that piece of it's going to be geared more towards larger utilities, but it's also possible that nation state groups practice attacks on smaller utilities before moving on to bigger ones. Another important threat category is disgruntled insiders. There have been several incidents where somebody left a utility and their credentials, their passwords and accounts weren't closed, and they reached back in through remote access and caused headaches. So the attackers might go against the business network with phishing or remote access, or taking advantage of unpatched and vulnerable software and firmware, or they might go after the control system. The most common approach is going to be using your remote access against you, but also potentially if you have things exposed, hardware and software exposed, taking advantage of unpatched systems. And then they're also going to, potentially come in through the business network to then take the next step to the control system, the SCADA system. And possible consequences. So, the biggest, always in the news, there's ransomware, and it's against schools and cities and businesses. So, and the water utilities are frequently facing that. There's also something that's called business email compromise or vendor email compromise, and that's convincing. So that guy convinces somebody in your utility to transfer money. So it's electronic funds transfer that gets redirected. And it's like a social engineering thing. Somebody convinces one of your staff members or you to like, nope, we changed banks and now you need to send the money to here. There's also, the theft of personally identifiable information. So if you have a billing system with credit cards, that's a risk and a possible problem. On the industrial control system side, there could be the theft of the design documents. So somebody might do a staged attack where they're basically collecting as much information and details as they can, and they start by just getting those documents, because then with that they can go into deeper into the system and do some pretty sophisticated things. There's ransomware. It's not as common on the SCADA system, but we'll see a couple of examples of that. Somebody who breaks in might disable the SCADA system, so that forcing you to run manually, which may be hard to do, or maybe you're already designed to do that. Manipulating the water system, either the treatment or the pressures, and then even it's possible to create a destructive attack where the infrastructure that you have can be damaged, and so that's more, it's like breaking pipes from excessive pressure and things like that. Here's a list of some of the high profile water and wastewater attacks over the last year or so, and so these are the ones that make the press. And, there are lots of things going on that don't make the news, and, that might be viruses or other lower level problems. And there are going to be a lot of ransomware and other bigger problems that don't make the news, just out of sort of caution and privacy concerns of utilities. But what's the reoccurring theme here? It's like, most of these involve ransomware. And it's interesting to see, a good portion of them are using remote access. There are a few, non-ransomware impacts, and the top, near the top, there are a couple that went into the SCADA system that applied ransomware to the SCADA system. And fortunately, in those cases, let's see, one of those utilities they could change their water source and then be less dependent. Essentially, they moved from surface water source to a groundwater source, and they didn't need the automation in the same way, so they could continue their service. And the other one actually had a very good manual operations. They weren't dependent on the SCADA system. And you can see near the bottom, there's one third from the bottom is a remote access, and that was a disgruntled employee who went back in to their water utility with remote access and deleted their SCADA files. So there's a real cost to cybersecurity, and it's essentially it takes more time and effort for everybody. And so if you're going to be cyber secure, you're going to spend a little more time having longer passwords and having different passwords for each account. An organization needs to assign a point person. There's going to be one person who's responsible. That might not be their full-time job, but it's taking a chunk of their time away from other things. And it's a real expense. And then there's the hardware, software, and training, and the consultants or other services that you might pay on this topic. It's real money. And leadership needs to, there needs to be a commitment from leadership. And that takes away from other focuses, but it's really important. And then, when there's a breach, there's a real cost. I find this is really like a perfect picture of part of the cost of a breach. And the center guy's a mayor. This is Oldsmar, Florida. center guy is a mayor, and he's kind of looks like he's maybe enjoying the attention, and the sheriff on the right's like doing his job. But the guy on the left, his name's Al Braithwaite, and he's the city manager for Oldsmar. And he is, you can see the pain on his face. It's just, it's part of the cost of a breach, is, the anguish and like the hard work that follows a breach. So their incident response service costs, their direct financial loss if you're, paying a ransom or you have one of those business email compromises. It might impact your bond rating and cause indirect higher costs, or there might be liability costs. The city of Baltimore a few years ago had experienced ransomware, and they spent a total of $10 million on all the direct costs and recovery and putting in new equipment, et cetera. Okay, so we have some poll questions, and this is to make sure we get TCHs out of this class. So we have 5 poll questions, and Rebecca will pull that up, and if you can answer that. First question.
If for some reason you cannot answer the poll, you can't see it, or you can't push the submit button, let us know in the chat box, or write your answer in the chat box. But for if you can use the poll, use it. Just let us know if you have issues. I'm going to close the poll in about 5 seconds. And Andrew, remember if you can see this?
Yep, I see it. And so there's a good majority of folks who said ransomware, which I consider the best answer, but other people said remote access. So that's it's definitely a common approach. And actually, if you're thinking in terms of a SCADA system, that's sort of one of the most common ways of doing it. And some others said business email compromise. So they're all common. And I think of ransomware as the most common, but those are all acceptable answers. Yeah. Okay. Now, what's happening? Okay. So on to cybersecurity measures. There's the first 5 are the ones that came up in that joint cybersecurity advisory that came out last month. So I'm going to pay more attention to those and touch on aspects of the other ones. So starting off with phishing, spearfishing, we're all used to getting phishing emails, and spearfishing is just a way of saying that it's not like a broadcast email that a bad guy sent out to try to trick us. It's a phishing email. It's one that's directed towards you, and it might have some specific something that catches your attention because of your background. And so this is an example of one that I got a few years ago, and it felt like a definite spear fish in terms of, like, my last name is Hildick-Smith, and this appears to come from Amanda Smith, and she's telling me how she wants to share her wealth with me, and so it was like, well, this doesn't look so real, but it's still like kind of, you kind of wonder. And in my case, what I did was I took the attachment, and if you belong to InfraGard, and I'll talk a little more about that at the end, you can take a suspicious attachment and copy it to an FBI website, and they'll do an automated analysis of it. And what came back was the attachment to this email if I had opened it, it would have turned into a keylogger. So it would have recorded everything I typed. So any and all passwords I entered would get relayed back to somebody else who could take advantage of that. And we're all definitely susceptible. Like if that Amanda Smith, pretend person had had like looked into, gone online and looked into, what she could find out about me. She might have been able to craft it. I mean, it was, probably he, lots of attackers are he's. He could have crafted it to be more realistic sounding to me. And so anyway, some things really stand out and others maybe just too subtle and we get tricked. So typically using email web links, so taking you to a compromised website that can take advantage of software that on your computer that's maybe not up to date, or file attachments like that one we just saw, that if you open some code or macros get played. Phishing can also be done through other media, so there are different names for it when that happens, but if it's can come through your text messages on your cell phone or the social media, or even QR codes can take you to a malicious site. Voice phone call, somebody can, does social engineering and convinces you to give your password or whatever they're trying to do. And so, just knowing that it can happen to any of us and we could get, fooled, just sort of know that, and don't feel bad if you happen to click on something or go, open an attachment or go to a website, and just let your IT department or your cybersecurity person know what happened. If you click on something and it doesn't, you open it up and it's not really an invoice, it's like, oh, I think I made a mistake. Call somebody up right away. There was one utility had a ransomware, serious ransomware attack, water utility, and one of the employees opened an attachment, and it was like, well, it wasn't what, it didn't quite make sense, but he didn't say anything. And a bunch of weeks later, the utility was subject to ransomware that started with that one action. And so if he'd spoken up sooner, it could have made a big, big difference. I'm going to go through, this is so, if you see a web link, it's like a lot of garbledygook, and but it's really has some, if you get used to it, it's pretty easy to interpret. You don't always know where it's going, but you can at least get a sense, right? So this is a link to a file on the CISA, that Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. And when you look at a web link, look for the first single slash, right? If you're moving along from the left and the first single slash you come is like, stop right there and look to the left, and the immediately to the left is going to be something called the high level domain. And domain is just another word for home, so it's like the category. So this is a government agency, so you expect .gov, or it could be .edu or .com or .org, or and then right after the period, moving back to the left, is the organization's domain. So that's what they've registered as their home on the internet. So and things that follow have to do with, like, on the computer at that site, there's a directory called publications and a subdirectory called CISA Cyber Essentials, and then a file name called test.html. And the start is the HTTPS is just what protocol the computer should communicate. So when you see a link, and this looks like a pretty good link, I would trust the CISA and the Gov part and hope that they've done a good job at protecting their system. But I'm still gonna, hover my mouse, right? So I'm gonna just, take my mouse cursor right over the address, and hopefully you can see. I'm hoping you can see this pop up with, like, so that's the actual plate. That little white window is where I'm actually going to get taken. And so if you see a link that just is a descriptive like this, that says click here or whatever, just slide your mouse right onto it, and up will pop the location where that link will take you. And so even if you see like the next one looks like a good link, I trust the looks of it, but I'm still going to hover my mouse over. And when I hover my mouse over, I see that like behind the scenes, it's really going to take me to Amazon.com. So that might be okay, but it might also be taking me to some, bad site that, it'd cause major headaches. So here's some examples of web links that are suspicious. They're not what you're expecting. Along the top, I've got the reminder of that, how it's the structure of a web link. So I'm going to move, from the left until I get to that first single slash and then back up. And there's the top level domain, and it's org. Well, I know that CISA is a government agency, so this link is like, somebody's trying to do something funny. They've registered a website and they're trying to trick me into going there. And so that one, The next one, same thing, slide down, hit the first backslash, and the top level domain is agency. Well, I mean, there is a top level domain called agency. There are all sorts of, there's a really long list of these top level domains. And CISA is an agency, but I know it's a government organization, so they're going to have a .gov at the end. And then this third one, you're going along, hit that first backslash, and it's gov. Okay, CISA gov, I like that. And then I go a little further back to look at the domain. And so this one, some bad individual has registered something that looks like CISA's domain, but it has an extra S in there. So that one's, I'm not going to click on that one because it's going to take me someplace that I don't want to go. Here's some other warning flags, phishing. Like most organizations have this kind of warning in your email system when something is coming from an outside email. The Exchange server, the email server is set up to pop up a message and says, hey, this one's coming from outside. So it's easy to kind of forget to not even notice this anymore, but it can help a lot if you're getting an email that's supposed to it's written like it's coming from the director of operations, but it says, external email. Well, somebody's trying to pretend to be that director of operations. And this second category here of red flags, there's certain types of files that hackers love to use, and these are two examples, like a DocuSign, because you have to, and zip files, both of them are like normal things. Be perfectly fine, and you might use those, but when you get an attachment in an email that has one of those two, just kind of like perk up and think a little more about who this is really coming from and what might be in it. If we were in person, I would start a video right now, which I love this video. It's only 2.5 minutes, and it's this amazing Dave. There's inside this is in Brussels. There's this guy. It was funded by a bank, I think, to sort of heighten security awareness. And there's this guy in the tent, and people come in and he reads their mind. And really what's happening is he's got a crew of computer folks looking online on the internet at these people's social media accounts and learning about them. But it's really fun and funny. And after this class or whenever, take a watch, because it sort of reminds you that we have a lot of information about ourselves out on the internet, and that information can get used to craft really crafty phishing emails. So whatever you can take off the internet that maybe it doesn't need to be there anymore. Reduce your information about yourself on the internet is a good thing, and information about your utility too. Okay, we're jumping to passwords. We all have dozens and maybe hundreds of passwords. Let's say we have so many accounts, work and personal accounts. Passwords, the two basic things. This is if you don't take anything else away from this talk, this is really good for your personal life or your work life, is make your passwords long. And I'll explain why in a bit, but if it's an important account, I always want to have it more than 14 or more characters. And if you have something that doesn't feel important, maybe make it shorter, but try to get in the habit of longer passwords. And the other thing is never reuse the same password. Like, if you use the password, whatever at Amazon, don't use that same password at another account or on your work computer. Have every account password different. And that includes not like doing little teeny tweaks at the end, like those passwords in orange are, essentially the same. So a hacker will try out variations. If they see that first password, if they get a copy of that, they're going to try variations on that. And if you have reused passwords in the past, just slowly go back and change them. For me, I find using a password manager is really helpful. I happen to use one called 1Password, but there are a whole lot of other ones, and it makes it easy for me to use unique passwords on every account. On the right, just want to go through like some examples of passwords. The first one looks pretty good. It's got the uppercase, lowercase, number, special characters, but that's a loser, right? That's a really common password, and hackers will try that and variations of that. The next one's really pretty complicated and random, but it's short. Turns out, and I'll go into it in a bit, that's really too short of a password for an important account. The next one would be fine, but it's like crazy to remember. You can have it in your password manager, and all your passwords could look like that. But the fourth one is a good way to go if you can, and that's making a phrase, having regular words, and inserting a few characters and numbers. That's long. That's long is important, and then don't repeat it and don't make like subtle variations on the same theme. On the top of this screen, there's a password. So I'm saying, somebody's using the password of spring 2021, and your computer stores it like this long hash, it's called. And it's just, I think of it as like, hash brown potatoes or something. It's just a real jumble. And if I change my password to spring 2022, it's not going to change the 1 at the end of the hash to a 2. It's going to rejumble everything, and it'll look totally different. And so part of having a password is knowing what the password vulnerabilities are. And I've listed some here. One is just asking. So it's somebody could send you an email that says, please give me your password, I need it. You're probably not going to do anything like that, but maybe there's going to be somebody is able to take you to a website that then pops up a message that says your Google account needs to be checked. Please log in. And it's not really the Google account that's talking to you, it's somebody else, and they're trying to capture your password. Guessing if you have a password like spring 2021, somebody's going to just try manually entering passwords, and they'll get in. Spraying is something Microsoft put out a report not too long ago about how common spraying is. And so what that is the bad guys will take a handful of common passwords, like just 3 or 4 common passwords, and then try those common passwords about everybody in an organization. And if it's a big organization, they're apt to get in and then start a full-blown breach. The next one on this list is looking up a password. So essentially, if you reuse passwords, one of your other accounts could get breached. So some little unimportant commercial account gets hacked and the hacker sells the account information online. And another hacker says, oh, I'm trying to break into, Bob at this water utilities account, and he'll look for in the sort of like the hacker forums for for you and a password, and then they can reuse it. Next one is cracking. So that's if somebody gets a hold, and it's not hard, but if somebody gets a hold of the computer version of your password, that hash, that long string, they can start trying to guess what your password is. And this is a video. This is like a video card, a graphics card you use. If you were a keen computer game player, and it doesn't cost a lot of money, and that can guess almost 3 billion hashes per second. That's crazy fast. And so if you have an 8-character password, it won't take too long for it to break that hash. And so when you get up around 14, it takes way long, like years and years. That changes over time, but that's a good place to be right now. And then past the hash, that's something we can't do too much about. It's sort of like a technical attack. If somebody picks up traffic on the network and is able to see the hash and reuse it. So that one's not something to worry about, but just to know that there are a whole bunch of ways that your passwords and hence your accounts can get compromised. So one really good thing to beef up the strength of a password is to add something else, and that's using multi-factor authentication. Super important. You should, every place you can do it in your personal life, sign up for it. If there's at work, if you have remote access ability, it really needs to have multi-factor authentication. And all it is having your password, or maybe it's a PIN, even something shorter, and combining it with a single-use code or a unique digital key or fingerprint or facial recognition. On the right are some examples that you may be used to, right? The first one is a single-use code that you go to sign on, and it sends you a single-use code to your phone. And so nobody else should have your phone. And so you type in that extra factor and get access. And the next one is, on your phone, there's a whole big family of authenticator apps, and you go there, you go to log into whatever site, you go to your authenticator app, and it gives you a code to enter once you've entered your password. And the third one is really nice. It's a physical key that you can plug into a USB port, and it's unique to you. And it's pretty handy to have, and it's the most secure of these 3 approaches. So you might look into that. It's called, that's a particular brand right there, but the approach is called FIDO. It's really good. Okay, patching and updating. We're still in our top 5 things to make sure everybody should be doing. And this includes, your home computer and your home phone, and obviously your work and phone and your work computer. There's patching and updating the operating system. So like, Microsoft Office, Microsoft Windows 10. Once a month on the second Tuesday of the month, Patch Tuesday, they release patches. The phones, Apple is really good at releasing iOS updates, and their Android patches and updates that come out regularly. If you have an old phone, like a phone that's no longer supported, it's a good time to get a new phone, because the weaknesses that come from not having patches applied can be taken advantage of. Other things that need regular updates and patches, firewalls and network routers. Your programs, the SCADA programs, and just your basic everyday programs, they all need updates as vulnerabilities are found. And firmware, that last one. So firmware is really just software that resides on a chip in a device. And so your SCADA PLC has firmware, your computer has firmware. It's called a BIOS or a UEFI, sort of like a modern version of the BIOS's basic input-output system. And it's just telling the hardware how to make use of other software and how to interact with the world. So that's patching is really essential, because there's so many pieces of hardware and software that we make use of, and all of them have some kind of vulnerabilities. And as those vulnerabilities show up, if they're still in service, they're going to get patched. If you happen to have a Windows 7 computer or even an XP, work hard to get rid of it. Windows 10 is going to be expiring, but it'll reach its end of life in a little over a year. So start thinking about Windows, moving to Windows 11. And that's a tricky move too, because not all of your Windows 10 computers or your Windows 7 computers can support Windows 11. So the sooner you start looking into that, the better. If you're applying patches, like at home, you might just like, okay, I'll apply the patches, that's fine. But at work, depending on the application or the system, if it's like a SCADA system, you want to test those patches before they go live. So ideally, you have like a separate computer or a little separate network that's looks like part of your SCADA system in terms of how it's set up to try patches out on. The last topic is like the tricky thing with patching, supply chain risks. And so you may learn that your PLC needs a firmware patch, and you go online and download that patch and apply it to your PLC, but it's possible somebody's corrupted that file, and that's supply, the term is supply chain risk. And one really prominent example was this software called SolarWinds that was hacked into, and a lot of really big companies installed the hacked version in their system, which left them vulnerable. And it's not easy. A basic good approach is to download the patch, that new firmware, and then wait a few weeks and go back to the site and see if anybody's noticed a change. And when you download the software, that patch, you can take a hash. So this is like your password. There's this, like, you can do like it's a way of like a fingerprint for the software, as you can apply a little piece of software to that firmware and see what the little fingerprint identification is. And then there's also certification. So it's a whole big topic, and not something to worry about, but at least to be aware of. And for it's more the IT, the OT hardcore people are going to be paying attention to that, and worth learning if that's where you're headed. Another one is remote access. And as I said before, you really want to require multi-factor authentication. If somebody leaves, and this is that disgruntled insider threat piece, if somebody leaves your employment, is revoke their credentials, close their account, shut down their password. And then whatever software and hardware you're using for remote access, to keep that patched, because there are regularly vulnerabilities and that bad guys can use, because often, what makes it remotely accessible is that it's on, it's visible on the internet. You might, I'm not going to go through those bottom items, but there's sort of other ways of just saying only use it when you have to. You can also take advantage of, it's not there, but they're like Verizon, for instance, has like a private cellular network that's not publicly visible, and you could maybe use that for your remote access. So the remote access device is set up on that network. So there are few, sort of two broad categories of how you do remote access. And one is, putting an application like TeamViewer or VNC or using Microsoft's RDP right on a computer in the SCADA system. So one of those things could be on this SCADA server, or maybe on the HMI on the SCADA system, and you connect directly to that. So that's can be pretty secure, but it's, if you have an opportunity, you'll want to shift to away from that, because you can have more security if you have a specific computer that's designed to receive calls, calls in quotes. And it's hardened, it's made extra tough and harder to break into. And then it's using a virtual private network software with multi-factor authentication. And from here, somebody remotely logs in here and then goes through the firewall or whatever you might have to the SCADA system. And just jumping back, the TeamViewer, VNC, whatever you use might be using now, that can also be set up with multi-factor authentication. So that would be the first step to take. In an ideal world, and it's not so common, but you wouldn't have remote access at all. You'd have 24/7 staff in a control room, and that life would be grand. But that's not so common. Okay, moving on to a couple more poll questions, quiz questions.
Looks like we have just about everyone. I'll close in about 5 seconds.
Okay, so vast majority went with it is long, and that is like the best thing to do with your password, is make it long. Some other folks went with it has special characters, and so having complexity is a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that answer. And some other folks basically said take advantage of the password manager, and that's a good approach. But if to make your password hard for people to crack or guess, go for the long. Okay, another question. Okay, so almost everybody said hover your mouse, over the address to see what the web link is, to see where it's going to take you. So that's how I look at it. And a few people said call the IT department, and that's okay too. But what you can do, maybe should do, is practice hovering over these links. Get used to it. Get comfortable with it. Sometimes people worry about, oh, I might click on it by mistake. Well, get your finger far away from the clicky part of the mouse and just hover over. But yeah, that's okay too. Is call somebody who knows, has more experience and can share that experience. Is an okay answer too. Okay, we got a few more cybersecurity topics to cover. One of them is backups. And this is good for us as, individuals at home. Hard drives and solid state drives are pretty reliable, and it may feel like these computers work forever, but just for that purpose, making backups of your important files and the utility, making backups of important files important. And then once you shift into the ransomware world, then it's like essential, because it doesn't matter how big or small your utility is. A ransomware attacker would love to take you on. And if you think back to that list of utilities that had received ransomware attacks, at least one of those it was really small. It had like 350 customers. So it's, size does not matter. So backups are important. Keep a copy offline, disconnect it from the network, because the ransomware is going to be looking for backups. That's one of the first things it's going to try to do, is find your backups and encrypt those. And it's useful to also keep whatever backup medium, if it's like a hard drive or whatever you're using, it might be tapes, is to keep a copy away, offsite. So if the building that houses if the server room catches fire and your backups are in the same room, that's no good. So keep a copy at a different site and keep it locked up, and then test the restoration. Physical security, in terms of cyber, is really important, and it's also great because it's something that we can all do and keep an eye out for. And if you're in the, we're in the operations side of the business, and we're seeing what's physically visible, what's out there and exposed and what's not locked. So if a bad guy can touch a piece of the OT or the IT network, they can take it over. And physical security has that same concept that cybersecurity has, of defense in depth. There's not one thing that's going to stop somebody, but if you have multiple layers, you've got a good chance of stopping them. And so in our case, we just want to make sure that we keep the doors locked that protect important equipment. The control panels that house the SCADA PLCs are kept locked. If that mantra of see something, say something, it's really valuable. If everybody's sort of thinking the way of like slightly suspiciously and reporting up what doesn't feel or seem quite right. And then it's useful to think in terms of like tailgating is a really easy, common way for people to get into your facility that don't belong. So I unlock the door, or I swipe my card, I use my card access, and the person just sort of scoots in behind me, or maybe even I like hold the door and welcome them in. So it's important to have, to think, no, for security purposes, I can still be polite, but I can say, I can't let you in. You're going to have to use your own card or use your own key, or, work through it, but don't just sort of politely say, come on in, you know, figure it out. From a cyber side, a computer side, these are the things that are important to physically protect, you know, the PCs and the servers. And the one I highlighted, the USB ports and the network ports on your computer, your laptop, your computer. It is so easy for a cyber like bad guy to take advantage of those ports and gain control of the computer, to get your password, to log in, to own the computer and the network. So keeping the whole computer in a locked cabinet, but being aware of those ports are like the soft spot. Protecting power switches, the network cables. It's, you know, it's not hard for somebody to splice into a network cable and be on your network. The telephone communications demarcs, where all the communication gear from the phone company comes into your building, that needs to be protected. The paper copies of your SCADA and network design need to be protected, and maybe you even have some, like, you know, password sticky notes under keyboards. And so, you know, keeping people physically out of control rooms or out of treatment plants is real important. Okay, I think we have a couple more questions. Okay, I think we're good with that. And nearly everybody went with Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. That's correct. One last question here, and then we have just a few more slides. We're getting close to wrapping things up. I apologize for going past the hour. Okay, that looks good too. Nearly everybody said multi-factor authentication, which is the right answer, really essential. And this is, we'll just skim through this. This is important if you're responsible for a cyber security at your utility, is having, identifying all the assets so you know what you have to protect. And there you can do it manually or automate it. Segmenting the IT system from the OT, so your business system from the SCADA system. And there are a bunch of different ways to do that. And that's something you work on over time if it's not separated right now. They're just on this quick point, you know, so people will say air gapped, and that can mean all kinds of things. But if your SCADA system is air gapped, you still need to pay attention to the security of it, and need to be kind of thinking about risks, because you may be plugging in a USB key to download data for environmental reporting. There are interactions that happen that you still need to protect against. Cybersecurity incident response plan. What I've done is, if you want to get into some detail, I've attached an addendum to the slides so you can print out the slides, and at the tail end are some details on what to include in your cybersecurity incident response plan. And the important thing for us is, you know, maintaining water service, right? So if you're just an IT person, you may only care about the computers, but we need to care about the computers, the control system, and most importantly, maintaining water service while all this is happening. Some quick resources: get to know your local FBI and CISA folks. Consider joining the WaterISAC. It's really good for advice on threat and best practices for SCADA and IT security. The multi-state ISAC is good, InfraGard. The EPA has a free cybersecurity assessment program. They'll review your security and give you advice. That's a real awesome resource. This is some more like details if you want to get fancier on what you do. You can refer back to this later. Some important sources of information. And then any questions? I apologize for running late. You know, one thing to think is, well, are there any questions?
There are. We have 3 questions.
Okay.
Okay. Can you talk about USB thumb drive dangers with SCADA systems?
Oh, okay. That's a really good topic because that's thumb drives are like a huge risk, I guess. It can contain like a virus kind of worm, like code that can propagate. There are things that look a lot like a USB. They look exactly like a USB key, but they're devices that have a processor inside, and they they emulate a keyboard. And so you can protect against code execution from a USB drive, thumb drive. There's some steps you can take, but if it's not really a USB memory device, it's pretending to be a keyboard, and it's sending a string of typed commands essentially to your computer, and it can take over and cause a lot of damage. There's another version that's like that actually lets you, this is bad guy tool, lets you emulate networking equipment. So even if your computer is locked, you know, the screen is locked, that networking emulation can capture the password hashes and again, own the computer. So here's what I recommend is you have, you purchase whatever brand of USB key for your utility and you mark them. I've used something made by Kangaroo Drive in the past because it's a good encryption device, but you make sure that, you know, by policy, people only use this key and they only use it for defined purposes. They don't take it to conferences. They don't move it around. Good question.
We use a VPN. Besides our own internal mishaps, what other cybersecurity should I be aware of that could affect our SCADA system?
So the VPN side is good. You keep that patched and use a multi-factor authentication, and people are then going through into your SCADA network. Yeah, it's going to be mostly sort of like become an internal threat. If you have that piece hardened, you know, if somebody leaves and you don't close the account, yeah, I can't, if I thought about it a little longer, I might come up with something. And feel free to send me questions by email. I mean, when I worked at the MWRA, I enjoyed doing volunteer cybersecurity projects and helping out organizations. And I work part-time now for the WaterISAC and for the MassDEP, but I still love volunteer projects and helping folks out. So feel free to send questions to that email address, and I'll get back to you with, you know, maybe more complete answers.
We have one more question. Would you like it?
Sure.
Okay. What is preferred and more secure? On-site external hardware backups or cloud-based?
Ooh, nice. That's a tricky question. I have a slight preference to on-site backups, but that's because a lot of folks don't do a good job managing the security of their cloud services. So you see a lot of events that like an Amazon S3 bucket was not protected. And so if you have somebody who understands cloud services and how to protect that, your data, that is a really nice way to go. You could set it up so that it, if ransomware gets onto your internal system, you can keep it, you can set it up to keep it from going to the remote site. It also could get encrypted as well if it's not set up right. So I still kind of lean to, another thing is on the web services, is that it provides a wholesale, it provides a bigger target for a bad guy is to go for a web services company. And they're really good at, the service companies are really good at protecting themselves, but it's a bigger target. So you're kind of clumping yourself in with a lot of other folks. It's a toss-up. I would go with on-site, but over time, the web service is good. Maybe you do a hybrid for a while. Okay. Just one thing I'd like to kind of close with, if there are no other questions, is as you move around your utility, be that person who's like the gentle nudge and keeps pushing, keep asking questions of your IT folks. What you can say, well, when are we going to install that multi-factor authentication, or when are we going to sign up for those free phishing tests, and just kind of gently keep things moving forward, because it's not easy being an IT person, and whatever support you can give them, they'll appreciate. And if buy them a coffee and donut or whatever, and just work with them, because they're super resource. And but you can be the promoter and keep things moving in the right way to protect the water system, in order to protect the water delivery and safe water.
Okay, well, that's it. Thank you, Andrew, for that presentation.
Well, hopefully it was helpful. And feel free to send any follow-up questions. I'll be glad to help in any way I can, answering questions or whatever.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Or as a reminder to everyone, as soon as you leave, after you exit, the evaluation will pop up. Just make sure you answer that in order to receive your TCHs.
Oh, and
it's also going to be emailed to you.
Watch that the Amazing Mind Reader video. It's just a fun thing on cybersecurity. It's a nice reminder.
Yep, you can get to that from the materials list right now, or it'll be emailed to you as well. So you can always open that up.
Okay, well, thanks a lot. Take care.
Thank you, Andrew.